right? But what is the relationship between King Von and Bite Down that you know?
They was homies. They Bite Down. Von love Bite Down.
Somebody dissed King Von. And not just anybody. Not some random internet troll hiding behind a keyboard. Not some out-of-town rapper looking for clout. This was Lil Zay Osama, a Chicago man, a street-certified Chicago rapper, who looked directly at King Von, checked him to his face, and said, "You're supporting the man who murdered my cousin." And Von, the same Von who let nothing slide in jail, the same Von who the streets called one of the most fearless men Chicago ever produced, had to sit with that. Had to answer for the fact that he and 600 Block were publicly screaming "Free Bite Down," while Bite Down was sitting in a cell charged with killing somebody's family. And now Big Mike, O'Block's most controversial insider, the man who has been sitting in front of cameras and dropping truth bombs about Chicago rap politics that nobody else will touch, is breaking down exactly what happened between Lil Zay Osama and King Von. What the messages said. What the confrontation really meant. And why the 600 Block's decision to ride with Bite Down created a ripple effect that Chicago is still feeling right now. Strap in. Because this one goes deep. Now let us set the scene properly. Because before we get into what Big Mike said about this situation, before we break down every layer of what happened between Lil Zay Osama and King Von over Bite Down 600, we need to understand the human reality at the center of this story. Because this is not just a rap beef. This is not just two Chicago artists having a disagreement about loyalty or respect or street code. This is a man who lost his cousin to a bullet. A real person. A real family member. Gone. And then watched the people he thought he understood publicly celebrate the man accused of pulling that trigger. That is where this story starts. Not with a diss track. Not with a social media post. Not with a rap battle or a studio session or any of the things that people on the outside associate with Chicago music beef. This starts with a funeral. With a family that lost somebody. With Lil Zay Osama carrying a grief that was real and raw and personal. And then looking up and seeing King Von and 600 Block screaming "Free Bite Down" on the internet like the man sitting in that cell had done nothing wrong.
Okay, so this wasn't just like an acquaintance. This was one of his like everyday homies you talking about,
That
right?
was one of his people. That's one of his homies. He loved Bite Down on bro.
Okay, so
now let us talk about who Lil Zay Osama actually is. Because some people watching this video know him primarily from his music, from his Chicago drill records, from his independent grind, from the reputation he has built as somebody who does not back down from confrontation, regardless of who is on the other side. But what defines Zay in a deeper sense? What makes him different from a lot of artists who come out of Chicago and talk about loyalty and street code, is that he is consistent. What he says in interviews matches what he does in real life. What he claims in his music matches how he actually moves. And when his cousin was murdered and the people responsible for that murder started getting public support from some of the biggest names in Chicago rap, Zay did not go to social media first. He went directly to Von. The entire fallout between Lil Zay Osama and King Von and 600 Block stemmed from them publicly supporting Bite Down, who had been arrested for the murder of Zay's cousin. So let that land for a second. Bite Down 600, a member of the 600 Block collective, was arrested and charged with killing Lil Zay Osama's family member. And instead of the Chicago community responding to that with even a degree of sensitivity toward the family of the victim, instead of 600 Block going quiet out of respect for the fact that somebody connected to them was accused of taking somebody else's life, they went the complete opposite direction. They made noise. They showed support. They put Free Bite Down into the culture like it was a statement of solidarity rather than an endorsement of the alleged actions that put him behind bars.
obviously, Bite Down, he went down for his case or whatever. And, and Lil Zay Osama is obviously mad about that situation. But he brought it up in the interview, kind of explaining why he had issue with King Von.
And Lil Zay Osama, who had every right to be at his absolute most volatile in that moment, who had every justification for going straight to social media and burning everything down publicly, chose to handle it differently first. Zay revealed the messages between him and King Von to clarify the dispute he had with Von about Bite Down. He went directly to Von. He had a conversation. He put his grievance on the table in a direct man-to-man way that actually reflects more street code than anything that 600 Block did by screaming free bite down in the first place. Because real street code, the actual version, not the performed version, says that when somebody from your circle is accused of murdering an innocent person's family member, you do not make that person a cause. You do not make their freedom a rallying cry. You stay quiet and you let the legal process do what it is going to do. But 600 Block did not do that. And Vaughn, who Zay considered somebody he had a relationship with, somebody he had history with in the Chicago rap ecosystem, Vaughn did not separate himself from that position either. And that is what made the confrontation inevitable. Because Zay was not just dealing with the grief of losing his cousin. He was dealing with the specific targeted pain of watching people he knew, people he had moved around in the same spaces with, publicly align themselves with his cousin's alleged killer.
And how they're falling out. Then he went to social media and also put out the DMs to where they were going back and forth. And you could tell that, King Von was kind of just still getting at him. You know what I'm saying? When you seen that, or if you seen that, what'd you think?
Lil Zay Osama went on record explaining exactly why he checked King Von about posting Bite Down 600. And what comes through in that explanation, whether you are watching the original interview or hearing it broken down through Big Mike's perspective, is that Zay was not coming at Vaughn out of nowhere. He was not looking for a problem. He was responding to a specific action that crossed a specific line. The free Bite Down posts were not abstract. They were not general expressions of loyalty to a friend. They were public statements of support for a man charged with murdering Zay's blood. And Zay needed Vaughn to understand that. Now here is where it gets even more complicated. Because King Von was not just any rapper in this situation. Vaughn was somebody with real credibility, real reach, real influence in the Chicago ecosystem. When Vaughn said something, when Vaughn posted something, when Vaughn aligned himself publicly with a position, it carried weight. It moved the needle. It told the rest of the community where the lines were being drawn. And the fact that Vaughn was in the free Bite Down camp was not just a personal slight to Lil Zay Osama. It was a statement to the entire Chicago rap community about whose side of this situation they were expected to be on. Lil Zay Osama then took it a step further, dissing not just Bite Down 600 but Team 600 and anybody that supported them. And that escalation, from a direct conversation with Vaughn to a public diss of an entire collective, tells you everything about how the private conversation went. Because if Vaughn had responded to Zay's direct approach with even a degree of understanding, with even a minimal acknowledgement that the situation was complicated and that Zay's pain was valid, there would have been no public diss. The fact that Zay went public with it means that the private conversation did not produce the result that basic human decency should have produced. And Chicago felt it. Because Chicago always feels these things. The city is small enough, the rap scene is tight enough, the street connections are deep enough, that when somebody of Zay's credibility publicly draws a line in the sand against somebody of Vaughn's stature and the collective behind him, everybody has to pick a side. Everybody has to decide where they stand. And that process of community division, that splitting of alliances and loyalties that happens when a beef goes public in Chicago, is exactly the environment that produces more conflict, more tension, more situations where things escalate beyond what anyone initially intended. And Big Mike, sitting in his interviews, watching all of this unfold with a specific perspective of somebody who understands both the O-Block world and the broader Chicago ecosystem, Big Mike has something important to say about what the situation reveals. Not just about Vaughn. Not just about 600 Block. But about the code itself. About what it means when the code that everybody claims to live by gets selectively applied. About what happens when loyalty to your people overrides basic accountability for what those people have allegedly done. And that conversation, the one about accountability versus loyalty in Chicago street culture, is the conversation that nobody in rap media has been willing to have honestly about this situation. Because accountability versus loyalty is the oldest argument in Chicago street culture. And it is the argument that nobody ever wins cleanly. Because on one side you have the absolute requirement of loyalty. The idea that you ride for your people regardless of what they have done, regardless of what they are accused of, regardless of how uncomfortable the situation is. That is the code. That is what separates the real from the fake, according to the streets. You do not abandon your people when things get hard. You do not go quiet when your homie needs you. You hold it down. Full stop. And on the other side you have the human reality that Lil Zay Osama was living in. A cousin is dead. A family is destroyed. A real life has been taken. And the person accused of taking that life is being celebrated by people who have the platform and the influence to shape how the entire community processes what happened. And at some point, at some specific, unavoidable point, somebody has to stand up and say that loyalty has limits. That there are things you do not rally behind. That screaming free for somebody charged with murdering an innocent person's family is not loyalty. It is something else entirely. And Big Mike understands both sides of this argument from the inside. That is what makes his perspective on the Zay versus Vaughn situation so valuable. Because Big Mike is not somebody who learned about Chicago street code from a documentary or a podcast or a blog post. He lived it. He paid for it, with 28 years of his freedom, in the most direct and personal way imaginable. And when he talks about what loyalty actually means versus what people perform loyalty to look like, he is speaking from a place of experience that very few people in this conversation can claim. And what Big Mike sees when he looks at the bite-down situation, when he examines the decision that Vaughn and 600 Block made to publicly support bite-down while Zay was grieving his cousin, is a fundamental confusion between loyalty and accountability. Because real loyalty, the kind that Big Mike has spoken about across his interviews, the kind that actually holds communities together rather than tearing them apart, real loyalty does not require you to celebrate everything your people do. It does not require you to endorse actions that hurt innocent people. It does not require you to make somebody else's pain invisible in order to prove that you are down for your circle. Now let us talk about what the public messages between Zay and Vaughn actually revealed. Because when those messages came out, when Lil Zay Osama shared the private conversation he had with King Vaughn about the bite-down situation, it gave the public something rare in these kinds of street politics disputes. It gave them receipts. Actual documented evidence of how two men navigated one of the most emotionally charged conversations you can have in Chicago rap. A conversation about murder, about family, about what you owe to your people and what you owe to the people your people hurt. Lil Zay Osama revealed the messages between him and King Vaughn to clarify the dispute he had with Vaughn about bite down. And what those messages showed, what they communicated to everyone who read them, was that Zay had approached this situation with more restraint and more directness than the public diss that eventually came out would suggest. He went to Vaughn first. He tried to have a real conversation. He gave Vaughn the opportunity to respond in a way that acknowledged the complexity of the situation, that acknowledged that while Vaughn might have loyalty to bite down as a member of his extended circle, there was also a real human being on the other side of this who had lost somebody, and deserved at minimum to not have that loss compounded by public celebration of the alleged killer. And Vaughn's response, or more accurately the way the situation progressed after that private conversation, made the public diss inevitable. Because when you go to somebody directly and that conversation does not produce any meaningful movement, when the free bite-down energy continues unchanged after you have personally communicated your pain to one of the most prominent voices amplifying that energy, you have no choice but to go public. Not out of clout chasing, not out of ego, but because silence at that point becomes its own statement. Silence says that what happened to your cousin did not matter enough to fight for publicly. Lil Zay Osama dissed bite-down 600, Team 600, and anybody that supported them. And the breadth of that diss, the fact that it extended to the entire collective and everyone aligned with them, was a direct response to how comprehensive the free bite-down support had been. This was not targeted at one person. The free bite-down movement within 600 Block was a collective position. So Zay's response was a collective one too. You want to make this a team sport? Fine. Then everybody on that team is getting addressed. And this is where WAC 100 enters the picture in a way that adds yet another dimension to an already complicated situation. Because WAC 100, who has inserted himself into virtually every major Chicago rap controversy of the past several years, had opinions about the Zay versus Vaughn dynamic. Had opinions about where accountability should and should not apply. And his commentary, as divisive and as controversial as it almost always is, actually touched something real about the way outside voices interact with Chicago street politics in ways that sometimes clarify and sometimes completely muddy the water. Because here is what people miss when they look at the Lil Zay Osama versus King Vaughn situation from the outside. They see a rap beef. They see two artists who had a disagreement. They see content, clips to react to, takes to form, sides to pick. What they do not see is the specific texture of what it feels like to be Lil Zay Osama in that moment. To be a man from Chicago who has lost a family member and is watching the people he shares a city and a culture with make that loss smaller by making the alleged killer larger. That specific pain, the pain of having your grief publicly diminished, is what drove every decision Zay made in this situation. And understanding that is the only way to understand why the diss went as far as it went and why the community responded to it the way it did. And Chicago, the real Chicago, the people who live inside this culture rather than consuming it from a safe distance. Chicago understood exactly what Zay was doing and why. Because Chicago has seen this dynamic play out before. Has seen what happens when somebody powerful aligns themselves with the wrong side of a situation that has a clear victim. Has seen how that alignment poisons the community, how it forces everyone to take a position, how it turns a local tragedy into a public political battlefield where the actual human beings at the center of the story get lost in the noise. And Big Mike, who has lived through his own version of this dynamic, who knows what it means to be caught between loyalty and truth in a city that demands you choose. Big Mike's analysis of what happened between Zay and Vaughn goes somewhere that nobody else's analysis has gone. Because he does not just talk about who was right and who was wrong. He talks about what this situation reveals about the system. About the way that Chicago street politics create conditions where good people consistently end up in impossible positions. Where loyalty, the thing that is supposed to hold communities together, becomes the very mechanism through which communities tear themselves apart. Because what Big Mike believes about King Vaughn, the real Vaughn, the Vaughn that existed underneath the reputation and the music and the street mythology, is that Vaughn was smarter than the position he found himself in over the bite-down situation. And that is not a small statement coming from Big Mike. Because Big Mike has no obligation to protect Vaughn's legacy. He has no reason to be generous toward a man who dissed him publicly and whose circle exiled him from the community he grew up in. And yet when Big Mike talks about Vaughn's intelligence, about the way Vaughn processed situations, about the way Vaughn thought about things when he was not being pressured by the immediate demands of his circle and his position, you hear something genuine. Something that is not about protecting an image, but about telling the truth about a complicated person. Vaughn was smart enough to know that screaming "free Bite Down" while Bite Down was charged with murdering somebody's cousin was not a good look. He was perceptive enough, the same perceptiveness that made his music so cinematically detailed, that made his storytelling so precise, to understand that Lil Zay Osama's confrontation was legitimate, that the pain behind it was real, that the ask being made was not unreasonable. And yet the pressure of his circle, the pressure of 600 block solidarity, the pressure of being seen as somebody who rides for his people no matter what, all of that pressure pushed him into a position that his own intelligence probably told him was wrong. And that is the tragedy underneath the beef. Not the diss tracks. Not the public statements. Not the sides that people picked and the alliances that shifted. The tragedy is that King Vaughn, a man who was genuinely brilliant in so many ways, allowed the social pressure of his environment to override the judgment that he absolutely possessed. And Big Mike has seen this pattern play out so many times in Chicago that he can recognize it immediately. The pattern where a smart man does a thing he knows is not right because the people around him expect it, and the code demands it, and the cost of breaking from the code feels higher in the moment than the cost of doing the wrong thing. And Lil Zay Osama, by being willing to confront Vaughn directly, by being willing to go public when the private conversation did not produce results, by being willing to diss an entire collective, even knowing the potential consequences of that decision in a city like Chicago, Lil Zay Osama forced those fault lines into the open. Made them visible. Made the community actually look at them rather than papering over them with the usual language of loyalty and solidarity and riding for your people. And Big Mike's point, the point that runs through everything he has said about this situation across his interviews, is that this visibility is necessary. That the Chicago rap community cannot grow, cannot evolve, cannot produce the next generation of artists and leaders without being willing to look honestly at the ways its own code has been weaponized against its own people. Because the code is supposed to protect the community. The code is supposed to create safety and stability and a framework for navigating conflict without everything always escalating to the most extreme possible outcome. But when the code gets applied selectively, when it protects the people with the most power and the loudest voices while leaving the grieving family members of murder victims to fight for their own dignity alone, then the code has stopped serving its purpose. And that is what the Bite Down situation exposed. That free Bite Down was not about justice. It was not about believing in his innocence based on evidence. It was about power. About who in Chicago had enough clout to make their position the community's position, regardless of the human cost to everyone else. And King Von, with all of his talent, all of his credibility, all of his genuine intelligence, was part of that power structure in a way that put him on the wrong side of a situation that had a very clear wrong side. Now Von is gone. He passed in November 2020, taken in a parking lot in Atlanta before any of the threads of this story had a chance to reach their natural conclusions. Before he and Zay could have had whatever final conversation might have eventually happened. Before the bite-down situation played itself out completely. Before Von had the chance to look back at this moment from a distance and decide whether the position he took was one he still stood behind. And that unfinished quality, the fact that so many of the conversations that needed to happen between these men never got to happen, is the thing that Big Mike keeps coming back to in his interviews. Because Big Mike knows better than most people what it means to have unresolved business with someone who is no longer here. He carried that with Von. He carries it still. And his willingness to talk about it, to put it on the record, to add his voice to the historical account of what Chicago rap actually was during these years rather than what the mythology says it was, that willingness is its own kind of accountability. The Lil Zay Osama versus King Von situation is not just a rap beef that happened to involve two Chicago artists. It is a window into the way that street loyalty and street accountability collide in real time with real consequences for real human beings. It is a story about a man who lost his cousin and had to fight to make that loss matter in a community that had already decided whose side it was on. It is a story about a brilliant artist who got caught between his genuine intelligence and the social pressures of his environment, and made a choice he might have made differently with more time and more distance. And it is a story that Big Mike, the man who was there for so much of what defined this era of Chicago rap, refuses to let be forgotten or simplified or reduced to something comfortable. The truth is always more complicated than the narrative. And Big Mike is going to keep saying that until somebody actually listens. And that is the complete picture that nobody else put together for you today. We went from the origin of this beef, Bite Down 600 being arrested for the murder of Lil Zay Osama's cousin, all the way through the private messages between Zay and Von, the public diss that followed, the 600 block collective response, and Big Mike's deeper analysis of what the situation reveals about loyalty, accountability, and the code that Chicago rap operates by. We covered the human cost at the center of this story. We covered the political dimensions of how power operates in Chicago street culture. And we covered Big Mike's most profound point, that King Von was smart enough to know better, and that the tragedy is not just that Von is gone, but that so many of these conversations never got to finish. So now I need to hear from you. Do you think King Von was wrong to support Bite Down knowing what Bite Down was charged with? Do you think Lil Zay Osama handled the situation the right way, going private first and then public when the private approach failed? Do you think the Free Bite Down movement was genuine loyalty, or was it a performance of loyalty that served the people with power more than it served any real principle? And what do you think Von would say about all of this if he were still here? Drop everything in the comments right now. This is the kind of conversation that the culture needs to have out loud, and this community does not shy away from the real ones. We want your thoughts, not the safe version, the real one. If this video gave you something that no other channel assembled for you in one place, hit that like button immediately. Share this with somebody who thinks they understand the Chicago rap landscape because they have been working with an incomplete picture. The full story is always more complicated than the highlight reel. And if you are not subscribed, what are you actually doing? We are here covering the stories that matter, the human beings behind the headlines, the conversations that the culture needs but keeps avoiding. Hit subscribe. Hit the bell. Do not miss a single upload. Big Mike is still talking. Chicago is still feeling the consequences of everything that happened during this era. And we are going to be here breaking it all down until the complete truth is on the record.